Welcome to Tycoon Talks. I'm your host, Chloe from Database Tycoon. At Database Tycoon, we turn complex data into powerful business assets with scalable, efficient, and strategic solutions that drive smarter decisions. Today, our special guest is Celina Wong. Celina was formerly the CEO of a leading data strategy consulting firm, and she's joining us alongside our CEO, Stephen, to dive deep into the challenges of running a data agency, the trends shaping the industry, and where things are headed next. So, let's begin. Celina, can you share a bit about your background and how you got into the data space?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and share a little bit about myself. I actually started my career in corporate finance. I had spent about 8 years in corporate finance at Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and at Amex. I was actually the business stakeholder asking a data team to pull the data. And at the time, we were migrating to a tool called Netezza, which if you've been in the industry long enough, these are legacy products, which the other day I looked up and they're actually still around. And the team that was doing the migration decided there weren't enough users using the drag and drop reporting UI, which I was using. And so they said, you have to learn SQL. And of course, I looked at them and said, what's SQL? And I didn't want to get fired. So I thought, I got to go learn SQL and build this report and reproduce it. And my boss at the time was so surprised that I had picked up a new language within a week because this is a weekly report. At the time, I just went and Googled and figured things out and asked a bunch of questions of the team that was doing the migration to get my job done. And I didn't realize I was gaining a new skill that was putting me down a new career path. And so I moved into Amex, where I was running customer analytics and using my new SQL skills to pull some of customer data, which, after then 8 years in corporate, I really wanted to move into the startup space. And so I joined my first startup as data hire number 1 and quickly became the head of data there. And since then, I've been head of data 3 times, where two out of the 3 companies have been acquired. And so the founders of the data consultants reached out to me to become their CEO. Or I must have been doing something right, where if you've got 2 out of 3 acquisitions in the startup world, that's a pretty high success rate. And so why not share that knowledge with other companies that are looking to do the same?
Awesome. And then this question is for the both of you. Running a data agency is obviously different from other types of businesses. What do you think makes it unique?
I think about uniqueness in the sense of what makes it difficult as well, right? Where if you're selling services versus products, and when I think about that, it equates to scalability and the difficulties of scalability. Because in consulting, right, regardless of what type of consulting you're doing, it's the people, and the people's capacity is a limitation. You don't want, your team's hardworking and dedicated, but you don't want to overwork them as well. And so a good problem you might run into is having too many sales, but not enough people to fulfill it, versus having a product that you're selling, whether it's a SaaS tool or a physical product, where you can manufacture more or eventually find some scale to it. And then for data consultancies in particular, the complexity of data. I think that as much as we try to make playbooks and figure out how to have repeatable code or figure things out that could scale in some way, I think that many companies have bespoke data, unique challenges to their data because of business logic and nuances. I mean, simply something like, hey, we had a fraud incident that was in December of 2019. That's specific to that business, and you have to go filter that out, right? So I think that makes it challenging and complex for us when you think about data agencies.
Yeah, I definitely want to jump in on a few of those. First, I want to say thank you, Celina, for joining. It's great to have you on the show. Yeah, I mean, when you run a data business, or when you're just advocating for data work in general at an organization, you have to be thinking about the value that will come from it and think about the ways to pitch that value. And I find that can be challenging for me. No matter how many times you do it, something may always come up with the business where there's something more complex about this scenario or this situation that means whatever you've done before, you're finding out on the fly, it's not quite enough yet. And your ability as a leader and as a team to pivot and adjust and learn on the fly, I think is crucial. I think for Database Tycoon, that's been the number one way we've been able to grow so quickly and, continue to take on new challenges at the rate we've been able to, is because everybody has to have that mindset going in that you're going to be figuring things out a bit as you go, but that's okay.
And then this kind of pivots into my next question. What do you both think are necessary and strong qualities of a leader in this industry?
Maybe I can take this one first and pass it back to you. I think it's often not the skills that people think of. The more time I spend in the industry and in this role, I feel it's about communication. I feel it's about making sure everyone in the room is on the same page. We think that the solution is skilling up, but if you actually talk to the person that was involved in the project, if something didn't get done, for example, they may have just had a different idea of what needed to get done, or they had a different understanding of how the tool was meant to be used, maybe from a previous experience they had. So sometimes it's just about knowing when to have that 5-minute chat and just unblock something quickly, and knowing when to, maybe more importantly, not get involved, let the people involved in the problem sort itself out.
Yeah, I think number one is communication. So just like you said, Stephen, the other thing I would say of what it takes to be a strong leader in this industry is actually strong business acumen and understanding business context. I think that a strong leader is actually a really good bridge between the business side and what the technical implementation needs are, right? And your ability to then communicate back and forth to each party in the lingo that they understand. Because when you talk to your team, they need the technicalities of what you're discussing, right? Versus if you're talking to the business or to a client, you have to show up as if you are on their team, right? And you're talking the same language that they're speaking, whether that's marketing, operations, HR, partnerships, the influencer team at a company. Regardless, you have to start picking up the lingo that they speak. We tend to default to just giving or to communicating the way that we might think. But I think the stronger leaders are the ones who have the perspective of the audience they're talking to and doing the extra work to translate that to them. The point of being a leader is not just getting your point across. It's knowing that your audience heard what you needed them to hear.
You've got me thinking back to the story you told at the beginning, where you said your first experience ever with SQL was just, frankly, being told you are now responsible for learning this. And, as you're talking about this now, as a leader, you are in that position where you get to introduce, I'm sure in your career, you have introduced so many people to the concept of SQL who hadn't worked with it before. And now you get to have control over that story, or I get to, or whoever is the leader.
Yeah. And just kind of following up on that, as leaders, how do you balance it all? How do you balance, client expectations, internal operations, and growth strategy? Because when you're running an agency, really all of the departments kind of fall on you, especially in small startups.
Honestly, there's some days I'm asking myself the same question, but really it's about prioritization. And I know that seems like such a buzzword, but it's true. A really good meme I came across was that you thought being an adult was solving a problem at a time. Turns out you're actually solving concurrent problems that are all happening at the same time, and new problems are being thrown at you while you're trying to solve those concurrent problems. That's how I, understand what's going on and why I need to prioritize. And honestly, some days I am reprioritizing within an hour because I'm on 13 calls, and within those calls, you might find out something has a higher sense of urgency, right? As leaders, especially in a data agency, there are 4 buckets you're always worried about. 1 is sales, 2 is the team, 3 is the client, and 4 is partnership. And the order and how you think about those always just keep re-ranking themselves, right? The way I honestly balance things is by figuring out within those 4 buckets, what can be delegated versus what is really important for me to handle within that day. And then after the day is over, I often write down all the things that I didn't do and had to do, and now have to reprioritize those for the next day. The things that I do is often just put that mental load down on paper, however you like to write your tasks down, and re-rank and prioritize those items at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, and then throughout the day as things come up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There are days where you're juggling everything, and some days things fit into place in the way you expect them to into your schedule, and someday you have fires to put out. And the difference for me between being like an independent contributor at a business versus being the business owner is you really do have the full responsibility for everything. It's much more important that you take action on something than spend all the time in the world getting one thing done right. And that's been a struggle for me, where I'm trying to figure out where those moments are where you say, okay, I've spent enough time on this task, or I don't have any more time on this task. So even though it's not done, it is now time to move on and deal with the new outcome of this. And I think if I get stuck in a situation where I'm too busy or I have too many tasks that came up on a given day, I'm thinking, well, what failed in the process? What led to this point? Because I want to assume that I'm building a job that works. And I know there's always going to be things that I can't control, but I want to make sure that for all the things that I can control, I put some thought into how to do that.
Yeah, I actually want to add up on that because one of the data engineers at my last consultancy had shared that they learned how to let go of perfection and choose progress over perfection, which is, related to what you're talking about. And I think it's really hard, especially when you come from a data engineering background or even a background where you're expected to deliver perfection. But in actual practice, sometimes the best practice way ends up hindering your progress. And then especially as a leader, especially as you rise up in your career, I think that you have to choose progress and impact over perfection, even if you actively know what you're doing is causing more tech debt. So I actually think it's really, really hard, to your point, mastering the art, right, of how do I know I've done enough? And how am I okay letting go of being perfect versus the perception of impact?
Yeah, and that kind of pivots into my next question. What are your biggest learnings from leading a data agency?
Oh, yeah. I have so many thoughts. I'm actually trying to summarize them. Biggest learning that I've had from leading a data agency was actually discovering what I'm capable of. Because when you've run data teams or you've been a data engineer, you've been responsible for that project or the work that's assigned to you, right? Or even as head of data, I'm responsible for the strategy and the budget, right? But you're not responsible for payroll. You're not responsible for sales. You're not responsible for building new partnerships. Like, frankly, when I joined, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to fail because I've never sold anything. I've never even closed a deal. I've analyzed deals. I've analyzed sales funnels. I know the data and the metrics to make this work, but I've never been the one executing. I've only given recommendations. The biggest learning that I've had from leading a data agency is realizing that I can go from this position of running a data team, never owning a P&L, to owning a P&L, and running the business and running sales and building partnerships and closing deals. I remember the feeling of closing my first deal and realizing it was possible. And I think that fear of whatever's next for someone is what holds them back. And so if someone gives you a chance, don't say no to yourself. Let someone else say no to you, right? Like, because if they see your potential, then how come you don't see your own potential? And so that's probably the biggest learning that I had leading a data agency was I didn't even know what I was capable of until I went and did it.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, and I think that part of it is just making the decision. There was a moment where you said, yes, I accept this role. And similar for me, where I said, I'm starting this agency, this business, where you don't know everything yet, but you are committing to figure it out. And you start doing it and you find out, what, as long as you take things day by day, you look up things you don't know, you talk to people in your network who you've seen do this before, it's all possible. The momentum that takes you along is very addictive. And then, it may not be as difficult as you thought.
And Celina, what led to your decision to step away from your role of CEO?
Yes. As we were talking about, like, if you want to go do something, go do it. Like, don't hold back. I think the opposite's also true. Like, sometimes when you go do it, you burn out. And I think that you're starting to see a lot of that come to surface around burnout, especially in the data industry. We often are doing work that's behind the scenes. That's considered back office work, right? And that doesn't sound glamorous because oftentimes some of the work we do isn't glamorous. When we think about prioritization and understanding, how to deal with burnout, sometimes that means learning how to prioritize yourself. My decision to step away was related to my health. Like, I understood that at some point I was getting to a cliff of, this is now burnout. This is what it means. And that's then me choosing myself first over that list that I told you about how I prioritize throughout the day. On that list, it was never me. And I think that I'm privileged and grateful that I can choose myself and step away. I know not everybody can do that, but I know for myself and the people who love me that it's important to choose to step away before it's too late. How many people have you heard, and hopefully no one's a first degree connection to you, but the stories that I've heard where someone's overworked so much that they've had internal bleeding, or, forbid that it's led to precancerous cells. And stress can do that to you. And by the way, prioritizing yourself doesn't mean you have to always step away from your job. It just happened to be what I chose to do. But my message is, understand when you should prioritize yourself. It's always, but how do you give yourself time throughout the day? And even if one day is really hard, how do you think about balancing that tomorrow or later in the week, or bringing that up to your manager and saying, hey, I'm feeling really burned out. I'm feeling really overwhelmed. How can I reprioritize things to give myself time back? And honestly, I wish I thought about that more when I was younger. I just kept climbing and climbing and climbing up to a point where I'm like, you know what? Enough's enough. I don't want to end up as one of these stories that you hear of someone where their stress got to them, to where, it's a point of no return. But that's my reasoning for why I had to step away for the moment, and then I'll figure things out. But in the long run, no one on their deathbed wishes they worked an extra day.
Yeah.
So, that's the perspective that I try to keep.
Oh, thank you for being so vulnerable and open about that. And kind of following up, if you could go back and do one thing differently, what would you have done?
Yeah. You can always reimagine how alternative scenarios could have played out, right? One thing I would have done differently is probably hire a second senior person as fast as I could. I think sometimes people think, oh yeah, I'm just going to build out all these data engineers and I'll run them and I'll manage it. But to all people leaders out there, I'm like, you're human too. So having an additional person who is essentially, your right-hand person in the sense that they know how to run operations while you figure out sales, or they figure out sales while you run operations, is a much healthier balance when I'm talking about prioritizing yourself. Because how are you supposed to prioritize yourself if all these things fall on you, right? If you're sitting out there saying, well, you could have prioritized yourself, you're the CEO, you could choose to do whatever you want. Not true. Because if people's payrolls are on your back and you're a good leader, that is something that might be invisible to the rest of the world, but that you hold on your shoulders because you want to make sure that the company runs smoothly. No one ever has to worry about paychecks. And these are all the things that people don't see or don't think about when they see your title and what you're doing. So, but that's what I would do differently, is probably hire a senior person faster.
Got it. Yeah. And then we're going to move on to the next section, the trends and future of data agencies. So there's been a lot of talk about AI disrupting consulting and agency work. Do you see AI, and this is for both of you, as a threat or an opportunity?
Maybe I'll jump in on this one first. I see it as an opportunity, and maybe part of that is because I don't think we have a choice to see it as a threat. We either have to embrace this or fall behind. There's a lot changing in AI every day. This is some incredibly rapid pace of change we're seeing, and everyone that I know, everyone is trying to figure out how it fits into their workflows, and no one that I know has the perfect answer yet. And I feel like we're still in this early stage of figuring out, what does this technology really mean for us, for the industry, for the world? We don't have enough time to talk about that part of it, but at least for us, are we going to use LLMs to program our code faster, or are we going to replace our programmers with LLMs? And I don't want to get too, existential, but for those reasons, I'm trying to focus on it as a opportunity, because I think with the right focus and with the right lens looking at it, there are really good ways I can think of to use it to improve my workflows. I just want to make sure I'm actually understanding everything that it can do. And I'm just trying to follow along with the experts or the people who claim to be experts in the field to make sure I'm tracking that. But what's your experience been, Celina?
I mean, the entrepreneur in me, of course, thinks opportunity, duh. And I also equate it to imagine yourself when the internet was born, right? I think many of us grew up with a computer at some point in our lives, but imagine if you never did, right? And you're your parents' generation or your grandparents' generation, and you're standing in front of this new technology going, what's this new thing? It's going to threaten my job security, et cetera. You have to think about moments like that and say, am I embracing this or am I rejecting it? And you now see the future of those things and you're like, well, those who embrace it were rewarded, right? And so it's the same thing here, where I think that those who embrace will be rewarded with new opportunities, and those who don't know how to go about AI will end up having to find new routes along the way. And then the unfortunate side, to your point, Stephen, is people will lose jobs, right? I've already been hearing it from other data leaders, the perception of like, can we hire less data folks? Can we let go of people because now we've got AI tools? And it's quite dangerous for executives who don't fully understand it to start making those decisions. But yeah, I still think of it as an opportunity from an agency perspective, because people still have to, when I say people, I'm like leaders, companies, organizations, whether for-profit or nonprofit, still have to get AI ready. It's still fundamentally a data engineering problem where they don't have clean data to work with to begin with. And then it's also learning how to use the tools that are out there, right? Like we're like, oh yeah, prompt engineering, sure. And that we're still mastering. So imagine someone who's not technical at all and they're barely learning how to write an email and they're like, what are you talking about? What is prompt engineering? And so I think there's still plenty of opportunity, especially the fact that we're still learning. It means that whatever we learn, we can pass on to somebody else.
Looking ahead, like where do you guys see the data consulting industry? Looking ahead, where do you see the data consulting industry headed in the next 5 to 10 years?
So this is definitely related to the last question, because I don't think I could tell you what data engineering is going to look like in 5 years from now. I don't think I could tell you what it's going to look like in 5 months from now necessarily. I think by keeping those opportunities in mind, it'll make it easier to understand where the future is headed. And I really do think that LLM is going to have an outsized impact on the direction of this. I have a feeling that in the next couple of weeks, you're going to start to see all of the hobbyists out there put their articles out about, oh, here's how I figured out how to get, an LLM to write a DBT model for me using a page of documentation that I just submitted. We have the technology now to solve these problems. It's just a matter of waiting for enough people to have enough mental bandwidth to start solving them and sharing that info. I still think that there's plenty of work to do, and I think the work is always going to be changing. I just think that if I follow the playbook I'm following now, in a year from now, 2 years, 3 years, I don't think it's going to be successful. So I'm going to be looking to constantly reevaluate, what does it mean to be an agency in this industry, and how is that going to be changing with all this new tech?
I mean, we're already seeing it. I think you're just going to see more of it. More and more data consultancies or agencies are all going to say, I'm data/AI. There's already so many agencies doing it. I think that you're just going to find even more of them saying that on their LinkedIn bios or their websites. The other thing I will say is that in business, everything's a cycle. So is history. And so with cycles, what you find is with layoffs, you might find more and more people out there freelancing on their own or trying to build their own data agency. So you may find more and more smaller agencies or individuals doing it. And then eventually my view is that people will reinvent themselves, and companies will find that, hey, we might have all these AI tools, but we don't know what to do with them. And I need people who understand how to operate with them. And data folks might leave the world of data in the sense that they're now running marketing because they actually know how to run the AI tool. And now they become marketers, or ops and whatnot. When you think about CDOs, there aren't enough CDO seats in the world, chief data officer roles out there for us to climb into, right? And so that's why you'll hear data people talk about what's next for me when it comes to the C-suite, because they end up either having to build their own company to become the CEO, or join a company, eventually become the COO, they become the CTO, but you rarely hear about CDOs. There just aren't that many companies out there with the CDO seat. I would say the same is true even with the levels below, where eventually the companies are going to say, I don't need that many data engineers because I've got AI. But what they won't be able to do is understand, well, why doesn't it work? Turns out the data isn't clean. Well, I'm going to need some data engineering for that. But then how do I use this tool and then operate with that? I think an interesting path for data folks to consider is how to leverage your data and background to then utilize AI tools to help the business run. It's probably something that people have not thought of, but I thought that it would be interesting for folks to consider, especially if you think that you have a knack for data plus something else.
Yeah. And speaking of what is next for you?
I love that question because then I'm still thinking about it. I am thinking about putting out data leadership content. I've had quite a few people approach me asking for advice, and then also asking, do you have a blog or something I can follow your thoughts on? So that's not something that I will now have the time to go do and put out there. And then it's considering either starting my own thing or joining a company where I really enjoy working with the people and believe in their greater mission, right? So it's an open field, but that's what's next for me.
Cool. And so
Awesome.
now I'm going to re-invite Avishua to the stage. So, do you have any questions for Celina or Stephen?
I do. Thank you both for sharing your thoughts. First question, earlier on you talked about ICs and data practitioners like developing their business acumen. What do you think are good ways for data folks to do that? Like, should they be asking certain questions or pursuing certain projects? What do y'all think?
Do you want to take this first, Celina?
I'll give an example, right? Like when I was running a data team at a skincare company, Tula Skincare, and I was building out my data team there, one thing I encourage the team to do, so if you're working with clients or if you're working internal, it's always having a conversation with the business stakeholder who's asking you that data question and understanding a little bit more about their role. I had no idea what the creative team did. I'm like, oh, creative, sure. You do put out imagery, you put some words on the image, things that I'm not good at, but we see this in our ads. And I see the metrics behind it, and we do the analysis and help you figure things out. But if you understand their flow better, then it helps you start thinking like them and start understanding what would be critical insight for you, right? Or when I'm talking to finance, like what are the things that you care about? They, of course, care about, the P&L, profit and loss statement. And I think understanding that is probably one of the biggest ways for me to understand, well, what are the levers that we have here? Because it also allows me to say no, to be honest. Like if somebody asks, you're getting a ton of requests, how do you know when to say no? It's understanding, well, where does this rank when it comes to helping the company? Because if you think about things from the objective of the company or organization versus the individual, it's a lot easier to prioritize and understand and get into like understanding business acumen. I think to summarize, like ask yourself, do you understand the company's P&L today? And if not, you don't even have to talk to someone right away. You could even look at the company's P&L or try to, if it's public. But if it's not, it's like, how can you set up some time to understand that?
You don't have to understand the business because the data is there and you have a task and you can do what you need to do. But I think anyone who operates like that is going to be severely limited. And they're probably not going to be the creative partner that the business needs on the data team who will help them think about solving problems that maybe they haven't thought about. If you can get invested in the domain you're working with, you'll probably start to recognize patterns in data and say, hey, there shouldn't be 3 copies of the same, customer in this table, or, there's a whole number of things like that where an error isn't always about compiling something. Sometimes it's about knowing when data shouldn't be where it is and being able to tell and talk to the business about that that concept?
I think every time I start a new job or you start a new project, but especially when you start a new job, amongst some of the first questions I ask myself is, how do I know this number is right? Like, how many times have you pulled a number and you're like, I don't even know if that's right? And how do I know I'm even in the right ballpark? Because if you were asked to pull the revenue of a division and your number is bigger than the total company, you're like, something's wrong with what I just did. I use that as a way to actually learn more about the business, because then I know I'm like, am I totally, in a different baseball park? I'm not even in the park. I'm like in some other field because my number is way too big because I didn't have the right filters in my query, or I'm looking at the wrong table. So to tie it back to what we do on a daily basis, it's like, even tying it to like, how do I know I pulled the right number? It's like, well, you got to have context. And context means I got to go learn the business.
Absolutely.
And do you have any more questions?
I do. Yes. Thank you for that. And actually, just to add on to that real quick, something I've found that helps me develop the acumen and also build relationships is shadowing folks, especially if I'm like automating their reporting or their processes, like scheduling time to just have them show me exactly what they do. The questions come more naturally as it's like on my screen or in person next to them. I can see them like, why are you doing it like this? How are you pulling this number actually? I've definitely found that helps me develop the acumen and a relationship. But my next question is, what do y'all think are the advantages of working for an agency versus in-house somewhere for like an IC, a manager, or a leader?
Good question. My initial thought is that they are totally different experiences, where when you are in-house, your incentives are really a lot different than an agency. And not that either is good or bad. Inherently, they work together strategically. But when you're in-house, everything we just talked about with the investment on the business side is probably double or triply important than it is as a consultant. Like, I think as a consultant, you obviously gain success by leaning into that, but in-house, you have no choice. So I think as an agency, and Celina, I'll tag you in here in a second. I'm curious your thoughts. I think you have to find the line of how involved am I really going to get as this agency? Where's the fine line between I'm still providing value and I'm not chasing down all kinds of random things that may be, low impact today, but important for the business. I find that it makes it a little helpful, a little easier to focus priorities. And sometimes it's easier for me to be the bad guy sometimes in rooms where I can say, listen, I think this needs to get done. And if we can't do it this way, then I may not be the right partner for you. Whereas if you're in-house, your job is your job and you're going to keep it or, try to figure out how to keep it one way or another. What are your thoughts, Celina?
When I think about in-house, I actually think you have a lot more context for the data you're working with, right? This company is the one thing you care about. And then your relationships are a lot stronger because you're spending day in, day out with the people at your organization. And then I think from an agency perspective, the pros is that you get to work with a lot more companies. So if, depending on how long you spend at a company and you think about your career span, you don't get to see all these different industries versus in an agency, you do. Sometimes you might get the surface, sometimes you get very deep in a project and you might, understand more nuances. And the other thing is playing with new tools. Like when you're at one company, especially if the stack is already set by the time you get there, you're just playing with that stack, right? And then maybe once in a while, you might get to play with something new if you decide to migrate. But no one likes migrations. Versus as an agency, depending on your client, they might have a stack that you've never worked with before, but maybe somebody on your team has some experience and then you get to learn next to them. And then sometimes you get to influence the type of tech that they buy. You can also then make it a moment where you and the team innovate alongside with the client because the client's willing to innovate with you. Now, all of you get to play with a new technology. So I would say those are the pros and cons. You get to see more, but I feel like you're not as invested in the context because you're not being invited to all the town halls. Your relationships aren't as deep with the company, but you get to see a lot more and vice versa, right? Like if you like to get deeper into a certain area or subject, then I think in-house is great because you get to build more of that context, more of the relationship, dedicate yourself to that mission.
And so now we are at time. So before we go, Celina, if people want to keep up with what you're doing and see what new content you're going to be producing, where should people keep up with you and follow you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, and that's where I will likely announce a new Substack as well. But that's where you can find me and can also reach out to me.
Awesome. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. Stay tuned for our next episode where we're going to continue to explore the world of data, innovation, and leadership. So thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Celina. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.